Hello, I'm Sharon.
And I'm Wendy.
Welcome to Brown Space. This is a safe space where we talk about the hard topic of racism.
And build empathy through the healing power of conversation.
Thank you for joining us.
Welcome, ladies. Sharon, will you introduce everyone?
Oh, okay, I can do that because these are two of my daughters. One is a spiritual daughter, Semikah Yisrael-Johnson, and she is a licensed mental health counselor. Her organization is called Committed to the Journey. And then there's my biological and definitely spiritual daughter as well, Shaana Wilson. And she's also a licensed mental health counselor. And her organization is Revolutionary Change Counseling. And I'm just so proud to have both of them here to school us a little bit on mental health and as it relates to the issues of racism and to just be educated and have a good discussion.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. So good morning to both of you. I'm looking forward to this dialogue.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for, first off, having this space for these conversations. They're so important, and especially from a mental health perspective.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So, you know, the lingo or the word these days, a buzzword, there's always a word that everybody's using, trigger or what have you, and trauma. Everybody's talking about trauma these days. So I just wanted to start out by asking, what is trauma? What does that even mean? Can you give like a clinical, but in layman's term, what is trauma?
That's such a great question. Trauma is so complex, right? There's so many layers to it. But trauma, simply put, is a negative emotional response to a situation or an event. So anything that impacts you emotionally negatively is considered trauma.
Anything?
A great definition. I like that we're using layman's terms, right? Because we want other individuals to be able to understand what this means because we hear it so often. So it's helpful for us to be able to kind of process it and conceptualize it like in our everyday life. What does trauma look like? How would I know if someone experienced trauma? So Shaana hit it right on the head.
Awesome. So I don't know if Wendy has anything to add in terms of her understanding of trauma. But I was...
Go ahead, yeah.
I was, and I shared the article with you. I was reading an article last night about race-based traumatic stress as opposed to post-traumatic stress syndrome. Because when we don't know as laymen, we kind of just throw it all together and go, okay, it's kind of like post-traumatic stress syndrome. It's race-based trauma, it's trauma. But as I read, I learned that, it's not considered an disorder, but rather that it is an injury to a person's emotional and mental and even physical well-being. And so if anybody can speak to that, what do you think?
Mm-hmm. I agree with that in terms of the race-based trauma versus post-traumatic disorders, race-based traumas, race-based stressors. When I think of it, those are the things that are going on right now, currently, the things that we're actually living through, the things that we are witnessing. And the piece in regards to it being race-based is that there are a lot of experiences that are, I would say they hit differently for different cultures, different people, different communities. And that adds an element to it. While we all see things, we may not all feel them the same way. As Shauna mentioned earlier, it is that injury. It's that feeling of powerlessness or that unexpected experience that registers in our body as trauma.
I just have to be uber transparent here that I have been privileged not to have thought about race-based trauma until this summer when Sharon and I started talking about inviting you ladies to come on and share, educate on this topic. And I thought, holy mackerel. I mean, I'm aware of and have experienced all kinds of trauma in other ways, but not based on my skin color, not based on my race. And that is something, you know, skin color is something you can't hide at all. And I wouldn't want anyone to feel they had to. And I'm realizing that's exactly the root of the problem, is that it would be like trying to hide the fact that, you know, I'm female, which can be done more easily than hiding the fact that my skin is this color. So I'm like, okay, this is a new ball of wax to waking up. We talk about being woke, but there's so many layers to this. I mean, we don't know anything about walking in each other's shoes, and that's why we have these conversations. So for white-skinned folks watching, listening to this conversation, I just want to say, yep, it was a new topic for me too, and we got a lot to learn. So take us in.
You know what, though, Wendy, I think that you sell yourself short, because I think if you are open to, which you were, that same article I was reading, it talked about vicarious trauma, right? Yeah. So you were not specifically the recipient of whatever the incident was, but as you watched it, it was a traumatic experience for you. You had a negative emotional response to it.
Yeah, which then sparked our conversation. So you're right. All right, so it doesn't matter our skin color. We can have that vicarious traumatic response, can't we? Okay. Thank you, sisters. Because yeah, I think that might be one of the reasons so many white-skinned people shy away from the conversation, is just how overwhelming it is. But we have to stop living in the overwhelm, because otherwise we're abandoning all of our, you know, brothers and sisters of color. So enough about that. You know, I want to put the focus on, let's understand it. Or maybe that is how to understand it. I don't know. I'm going to let y'all talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this conversation that you're having is the start of two things happening at the same time. There's, you know, learning, understanding culturally about others that don't look like you, but at the same time also being able to have some healing and reconciliation. So, you know, two things can be true at the same time, where you're bridging the gap, and not only trying to learn and understand, but also heal through these conversations and these types of interactions. In our field, a lot they talk about this term, and they train us, right, Semikah, with cultural competency. And cultural competence is your willingness as a therapist to identify the culture of someone else, but also understand, learn, respect, you know, their culture, And I think it's just a way for you to begin to grow culturally and begin to exercise empathy in ways that you hadn't before.
Definitely.
What you said, Shauna, and as you were talking, especially with the word simultaneously, it kind of reminded me. It reminded me, and it kind of connected with what you said, Wendy, in terms of vicarious trauma, or not being maybe have that same outside appearance, but if you're a human being, if you have an element of compassion, if you have any semblance of empathy, things will hit you. So to the learning and the understanding component, we as in persons of color, we may identify like, okay, I'm a woman of color. Woman of color does not always equate to an African woman or a West Indian woman. And, we all have different experiences. I can be a woman of color from South America or from Honduras, and I had a dramatically different experience than a Black woman in America. Point being, the learning and the understanding. So in this field, they talk to us about cultural competency. But Shauna, you said to have healing. So the recognizing and healing at the same time. And it directly reminded me of being a clinician and working with newly arrived people, arrivals into this country, and sitting down and understanding that they had a long journey to get here, and one that was filled with traumatic experiences from being separated with families and being in the hands of strangers and traveling different countries and states to get to a point of safety. So while I'm holding the space for that experience, I personally recognize that reminded me of my ancestors' experiences.
Right.
It was the same experience, but the separation of families, right? Losing rights, feeling powerless, not knowing how to reconnect to your roots, wondering if you'll ever see people again. So the learning, the recognizing, and then I'm always reminded that there's still healing that needs to be done individually, culturally, as a people. There's still a lot of healing that needs to be done. So even in our efforts to help someone else, we may wake something up inside of us.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Yeah.
Sales, the TED Talk that we watched, sales or salads, she puts it this way, right? And it speaks to what you were saying, Semikah, about the importance of not just, okay, I have a story and I have a story and I have a story, but it's a collective telling of the story so that there can be that understanding as a whole and bringing forth empathy, as Shauna puts it, because we all have a story, and my story is not necessarily better or worse than yours. But if we can come together and have that safe space to collectively tell our story, then that learning and understanding can begin to happen.
Yeah, well said. This is meaty.
When I actually thought about the topic, I said, ooh, this topic, there are so many layers, there are so many directions it could go in. But there is a lot of learning and a lot of understanding, to talk about racism and mental health. you have the institutional component, we have the systemic component, we have that direct care cultural factor. And those are the things that are outside of the individual. So an individual is coming in with their own experiences, right, Shauna? And then there are the factors that are going on around us outside of what we're already dealing with. So I say that to say this is a big topic, very needy, but hopefully we'll be able to kind of make some connections, and then maybe just give an element of maybe a foundation, right, for us to start thinking from, or a direction for us to start to look at mental health, racism, culture, experiences, and access.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That way.
You've been watching Brown Space with Sharon and Wendy.
It's been so great talking and sharing here today. We look forward to your comments below, or you can email us at brownspace2020@gmail.com.
Remember, you are the light that gives light to the world.